For our closing keynote today, we're honored to feature the new CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Ahmad, in conversation with the California Senior State Executive for IBM, Laura Guio. Ahmad comes from the leadership group after a few years with Barclays, and Laura Guio is a proud graduate of San Jose State University. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to our speakers this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much for all of you who have joined us this morning. There is no one more fired up to be here today than me. I'm thrilled to take over for Carl and follow in his huge footsteps. And we are very, very fortunate to have Laura on today for a discussion that I think will be very topical and very interesting. And so, Laura, I will dive right into this, and I'll start with a topic that's near and dear to my heart, a topic where we're going to drive substantial and significant change in Silicon Valley around, which is diversity. Diversity in our member companies, diverse educational pipelines, diversity from C-suite down. And the question is, what can corporations do to encourage and support underserved communities to pursue educational and career opportunities? I know how important this is to you as well, because you're a leader of our 80-person executive task force on diversity and equality issues. So thank you. And the first question is an important one.
Well, thank you. So it is near and dear to my heart. I have worked for IBM for over 30 years, and I've stayed with this company because we've had an underpinning value proposition here that we serve, and we serve everyone, and we have a diverse workforce. Because of that, I think it's helped us drive into what do you do to make sure that the pipeline coming into our companies is from all walks of life. One of the things that we've done from an IBM corporation is back in 2011, we started a program called PTech. It stands for Pathways in Technology, Early College, High School. And what it is a framework for having a high school and two-year degree program put together and placed in areas of our cities where we have underserved populations. We found a lot of those students in these neighborhoods where we first identified in New York City was our very first one in 2011. That these kids were not getting the same opportunities as everybody else. They didn't have the support systems in their homes necessarily. They didn't have the income levels to go to the private schools and get that. So we felt that was a place to start. In those schools, we were seeing graduation rates very low. At the conclusion of the first graduating class that came out, we saw graduation rates almost 100%, which is unheard of. The other things that we're doing in these schools is focusing the curriculum around what industry needs today. If you look at some of the job opportunities that are out there, they're around AI, they're around technology spaces in cybersecurity, they're around areas that students can have an opportunity if they have the foundation going into that. But one of the other things that we found in addition to PTech is this concept of new collar. We coined the phrase a number of years ago, but new collar is really thinking about a skill shift from credentials to capabilities. And it's about acquiring those skills that are needed today in industry and making it more accessible, particularly to those in the underserved communities and the underserved markets. People can prepare for these new collar roles with the skill sets that may just be 2 years. So when you think about PTech really focusing on that 4-year high school degree with a 2-year degree, and then this concept of new collar, which can be with students coming into the workforce or even individuals who are thinking about a career change.
Yeah, that's a tremendously relevant and important point. For me, as a high school student, I took community college courses. That was very helpful in getting me on a path to graduate school and an MBA ultimately down the line. And when we talk about topical issues, clearly nothing is more front and center than the challenges we're all facing around COVID-19 and this global pandemic. And I would ask as a follow-up, what the impact has been on these communities given the pandemic, and how has IBM responded when we're talking about this service and these very innovative ideas for our underserved communities?
So at the start of this pandemic, we very quickly started seeing an increased demand in accessible online learning growth opportunities. IBM has issued something, and we started this before the pandemic, but the timing could not have been more perfect. This concept of digital skills. And digital skills is a way to increase your knowledge in particular areas, particularly those, all of us working online and having those IT skills and being available with the right background of knowledge to apply for those positions. We have this digital skills program, which is open to both IBMers inside if they're looking for a different career switch, or even people outside worldwide. It's digital courses. It gives you badges and completion on certain topics that those credentials allow you then to go compete for some opportunities that you may not have been able to do in the past. My colleague Jennifer Hernandez is going to be posting in the chat area links to some of these opportunities that we see that are really going to help the community out there in building their skill set.
Well, when we talk about our member companies, right, we talk about the executives who are here on the line. I'd have a two-part follow-on question. The first is, as we're looking at alternatives to four-year colleges, they're big checks to write, right? And in this time, we're seeing so many opportunities online. I'd love your feedback around what some of those opportunities and alternatives might be. And also, again, for the member companies, trying to be action-oriented and thinking of where we can add value now. I hope that'll be a theme of my leadership, moving with the sense of urgency. Can you speak to how our member company executives can get involved to support these efforts?
Absolutely. So there's a number of areas. Let me start with P-TECH. So to date, there are 220 schools around the world servicing 150,000 students. These schools, the framework for that is companies work hand in hand with the particular schools. And part of that is students that graduate from these P-TECH programs with the member companies that are supporting them are first in line for opportunities for internships and for jobs. And let me just take a diversion there for 1 second. Internships cannot stop during the pandemic. I know there's a lot of companies out there that have thought, well, I'm not sure how well this is going to work. We're all online. We at IBM have not stopped our internship programs. We're finding creative ways to get these students engaged. And quite frankly, I think some of it is even more meaningful given you're kind of on a level footing with the peers and the organizations that you're coming into. So back to, companies can support P-TECH schools. In the state of California, we're got 6 schools lined up to begin here. They were supposed to start in the fall. That's been delayed just a little bit with the pandemic. But we're hoping to grow that number, double and triple that number over the next few years across California. There is an opportunity for companies to help engage in this P-TECH program. While IBM started it, it's not an IBM program. There's one area. Another is we have offered up something called AI education. It's not just about the students and getting their skill sets improved, but it's also about the educators and the teachers out there. So we offer this AI education program to help teachers get their skill sets built up and understand what is it that industry's looking for and how do I tailor my curriculum to better suit those kids. So, I would call on all my peers across Silicon Valley, the state of California, and the nation to really, look at where can you partner, what can you do to help bring primarily the underserved community, focus on those areas, but also other individuals, people exiting the military who are looking for a skill set, women who are re-entering the workforce. There's programs that we've developed at IBM for that and giving them a start to refresh their skill sets and find a meaningful position.
Well, I really appreciate that, Laura, and you've been such an exemplar of this type of community engagement and solutions-oriented thinking. I see in the chat box, we've got information for links and follow-up to find IBM contacts and learn more about these programs. I know P-TECH is no joke. David Palter, Sarah Garcia, our incredible team, as I was getting prepped and learning about this, President Obama had mentioned this in one of his State of the Union addresses. So clearly, you're talking about initiatives that have really resonated, but even more so produced measurable results and impact. Now, I know we're getting through our time here, but let me go to the Q&A and try to incorporate some of the feedback from the audience. And thank you to those who have sent questions. Why don't I start with April Treese, very important question. How do you ensure every child has the tools in the home to ensure connectivity, materials, technology, and space to access learning with equity in mind? And I know this has been talked about in some of our earlier panels, the digital divide and some of our underserved communities and less economically fortunate children who don't have computers or the equipment that they really need to thrive in a remote learning environment.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and it's a huge challenge that we're trying to serve. I know Mayor Liccardo in San Jose just announced, I believe it was earlier this week, a partnership where they're bringing hubs into communities from those internet providers that will then give an access point to students that otherwise wouldn't have one. A donation of technology, whether it's a MacBook or an iPad, and helping them. IBM had a challenge that we faced early on in COVID, where the New York City school systems came to us and said, look, we have 300,000 students in our New York City school system, and about 30% of them have been considered not having a permanent home address. So they needed the ability to have access through Wi-Fi to get their homework and do their studies. We put a program together with them, and were able within a couple of weeks to begin issuing those devices to the students and then getting them up and running. So there are creative ways, and I would say this too, there's not any one company that can solve that entire problem. It takes a community of us. I think I've shared with you before, I co-chair the Native American Diversity Council for our corporation. One of the biggest challenges we have there is these sovereign nations don't have access to a lot of the Wi-Fi capabilities and technology. So we're working with some partner companies to see how we can get hubs like I just described the mayor did onto these reservations to help these students.
Well, I see we have another follow-up question around P-TECH, and I'll selfishly insert one of my questions as well. And Laura, you and I have chatted about this, the importance, especially when we're talking about social change and impact of measurement, of metrics, so we can tell and a lot of things that make us all feel good measure success. P-TECH, if we take one example, can you speak to the metrics around that program or the numbers and how you're measuring its success?
Yeah, so a couple of things, as I had said earlier, you know, it's 220 schools worldwide that we've set up in 24 countries with 600 business partners that have joined in on adopting these different schools. Graduation at the high school diploma rate has in the 6-year area has 4 times the graduation rate that you would typically see in the underserved populations for those students going through that program, and a 5x improvement in low income statistics of those students that come from low income homes. We've provided, IBM alone has provided 500 internships and continue to bring those on, and that doesn't count all the member companies out there. So you're seeing a substantial improvement in graduation rates in both underserved and low income.
We have another question that's come in here. This is about partnerships, and it's from Lisa Riviere. Which key strategies have you found most effective in proposing partnerships with new schools for P-TECH, including models for criteria and retention of employees from diverse communities, et cetera?
Wow, that's a big question. Let me start with, how we partners to get on board. I mean, first and foremost, as a company, and we articulate this all the time, if you don't have a diverse work population, you will not be successful. There's proven facts out there that talk about the revenue income, the profitability of a company, and the diversity of those members within those corporations. So that should be the first motivating factor from any company to want to get involved. Secondly, if we don't start targeting these underserved communities where we have the diverse populations, you won't have the pipeline coming in. So the amount of time and energy any company would spend in adopting a P-TECH school and working with those students, they'll get it tenfold over in their improved ability to compete in the workforce and have a diverse thought process going on within those companies.
Right, right. And Laura, I'll pivot a little bit here to, and this is nice because I get to ask you some of the questions that I have of you and yourself and your path moving up the executive ranks. As a woman, when we talk about the challenges that our diverse populations face in really ascending up the corporate ladder, I'd really appreciate it if you might share from your experience what have been some of the key traits to your success, or what might you share with other executives who are looking up to you here in the audience and hope to model your successful behaviors to one day when they grow up get to where you are today.
Well, thanks for that flattering comment. I always want to turn around and look behind me and go, who are you talking about? But I would say first and foremost, my father was an IBMer, and he passed away 2 weeks after I started with the company. But he shared some very good information with me. He said, be yourself. You treat everybody exactly the same. It doesn't matter if they're the janitor or the CEO. So I would say first and foremost, be authentic. Secondly, anytime I have found when I get into situations where I am the ultimate decision maker, you're never going to have all the facts, but you do your best to be objective and look at the facts and make the right decision for the business overall. Sometimes it may not be the best decision for you personally or for your immediate reporting organization, but if you keep the big picture in mind and what are the right things we need to do, it will serve you well. And I'll say, lastly, making sure that you're bringing people around you and working with you that don't look like you, that don't think like you, that don't act like you, because it is that diversity in those organizations that really bring the power to what we can do.
Well, let me ask a follow-up around that. Diversity is not an easy topic, and that change is hard. And you've talked about the importance of managing diverse teams. Both of us believe that for our companies to maintain their competitive advantage, and I think it's directly tied to revenue, it is very important to have diverse leadership and diverse populations. How have you been successful in leading diverse teams?
I think, again, it comes back to being authentic, listening to everybody. Everybody has a voice in that organization, and making sure that, there's different types of design thinking workshops and things we go through that allow everybody to have a voice in the thinking process of what we're trying to work on. So, reaching out to those individuals that really bring a new, I'll say, breath of fresh air into an organization, and being conscious of making sure that you've got a big mix of skills and individuals within your team. It doesn't just happen. You have to think about it.
Right. And do you see for and I think we're fortunate this isn't the case with you and your teams, do you see for individuals with 2-year degrees, with associate degrees, or maybe those that haven't gone to the brand name schools, is there a stigma around that when you look at the STEM fields and when you think about opportunities for these students, or is that not the case at IBM? I mean, can you speak to that generally? Because for many of us, the stereotype, if you pick up Forbes or Business Week or whatever it is, you see these hot shots, and they've all done so very well. And sometimes you wonder why you don't see as many folks who have the associate's degrees or maybe haven't gone to that marquee school that has helped to catapult them?
Yeah, it's been changing over time. I would say in the last 10 years, we have seen within IBM a big switch in looking at what are the skill sets an individual needs to do a particular job. Let's take data scientists or a security analyst within the organization. That's a very specific skill set. Doesn't necessarily need the full breadth of a 4-year degree, but those 2-year degrees or those retraining skills that maybe somebody in the military has come in and had, you know, they've used some of the technology out in the field. Well, now they can come in and support that. So we've been very open and progressive in looking at those individuals and bringing them on board. I would say I've been doing it for a long time. I led a tech support organization 20 years ago. And typically it was, you know, you go to the 4-year schools, like you said, the named schools. I was hiring art majors. And people looked at me and said, okay, you're crazy. And I said, think about it. Tech support is problem solving and spatial recognition of what's going on. Art majors have that ability to look that way. And I hired a few in, they did fabulous. But it wasn't an area that people typically would say, you're bringing that into a tech job. But you got to think about what is the skill set needed, not the degree.
Right, right. And I found in your background what was very interesting to me. I think it's very important the conversation we're having around the Black community and opportunities for executives here, hiring more Black executives, a pipeline of Black and Latinx talent in particular. But you've mentioned your work with Native American communities, and all too often, again, not in any way to minimize what is a priority for me and so many of us in this room in terms of moving the needle here in Silicon Valley. But Native Americans, we don't often talk about them as part of this conversation. And I'd love, while we have this forum and this opportunity, if you could share what you've been doing in that space, because I think it's very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. So I've been co-leading this organization for 3 years now within IBM, and it's very interesting. You know, in any population, in any ethnicity diverse organization, you've got to think about it from a slightly different perspective. And one of the things from a Native American population was finding where we can tap into these individuals. We work with a group called ACES, which is a Native American engineering organization. We've been very involved with them in finding students, Native American students that have gravitated towards this group and having the skill sets that we're looking for to bring on into IBM. Also, during this time of COVID has been a huge bonus for my perspective in bringing individuals in, because a lot of the Native American students want to be near reservations where their families are. A very family-oriented family group is important to this organization. And these students having the ability to work remote gives them the opportunity to do the career paths that they want in some cases and still not have to move to New York City or Chicago or some of the places that their families aren't near. So we're finding that, you know, being immersed in what we call a business resource group, and in this case, the Native American one, has given us a perspective to really look at where do we find the students and what's important to a lot of those students in having a career.
Right. And we're fortunate to have so many educators, so many education executives here as part of our summit today. It's been a wonderful discussion. I would ask you as a follow-up for our educators, if we take high school or maybe if we're going up to CCDs and universities, if you could share what you believe can be done or what is working very well to prepare those graduates to come work at a place like IBM and be hired for a STEM field position with a top employer such as yourself?
Good question. I think there's a couple areas. If you look at from a high school perspective, educators need to really understand what's going on in the business world and taking advantage of some of the opportunities like AI education that we have and other There's other companies out there that offer similar type of experiences. We've in the past brought teachers in for a summer internship as a teacher to experience what we do. But all of those things together give a teacher a perspective of what are these students going to be facing and what is it they need to know to become qualified to take on some of these opportunities. I would also say working as a group, you know, understanding how to work as a team. So much of what we do today in industry is done collectively as a team. Individual contributions are good to a point, but you have to be a team player. So understanding that. And then from a college perspective, you know, helping those students get internships while they're in college, making connections with companies. As a San Jose State graduate, I have a connection with San Jose State, and particularly with the engineering program there. So making sure we as employers have those connections to the schools, and those teachers and professors also have that connection back.
Right, right. And I'll ask one more follow-up and then maybe turn to try to get one more Q&A question in. But the follow-up is about bringing your authentic self to work and to the office. And you have been able to do a lot in our community and clearly follow passions that are very important to you. You know, many of us have been in that corporate environment with revenue targets that need to be hit. And sometimes there may not be as much of an appreciation for taking time away from the day-to-day to contribute to the communities. And I would ask around that notion of being your authentic self, do you believe, two questions, do you believe that engenders greater productivity or retention in your team? And secondly, when you talk about the tone you set as an executive, what advice do you have for the executives that are listening to our conversation about how they can help their employees bring their authentic selves to work? If they care about volunteering in the community, well, that's fine. We'll work on your schedule and find ways for you to do it.
Good questions. I think first of all, you know, your last question first on executives supporting individuals doing this. IBM is very supportive of these additional community roles that we take on. But I will say I'm also privileged to do it. You know, it gives you a perspective in your business life by having the connections with the communities and those people where your families live. So, you know, having that whole connection together is really, really important. And then I would say the time away, it's well spent. If we don't support our communities, if we don't improve the pipeline of students that are coming in, we will not be successful as companies. So it's all in the whole circle there of what we need to do.
Right, and work-life balance and harmony also fits into that, to have happy employees who can be productive, but also, especially in this COVID challenged time, be able to manage and meet their home responsibilities. And I don't know if you would have anything else to add about that related to recommendations or what's been working well for you in managing your team.
Just stay connected. You know, reach out to folks, do one-on-ones, pick up the phone and call them. I think, you know, just having that one-on-one connection with people in your organization is extremely helpful. Right. And I want to thank you too for today, for the opportunity. This has been great. Is there anything you want to share in closing?
Well, as I said, I am tremendously excited to have this opportunity. So many of the folks who have been here today have reached out and shared a lot of nice messages. It's going to take the support from everyone in this virtual room for all of you executives to achieve some of the big things that we set out to achieve. I'm fortunate to have inherited an exceptional team from Carl, and Carl is someone who continues to be a great resource and so helpful to me. But I'll tell you, I've come here to try and get some big things done, and it's going to be very hard. My background, which I could say quickly, I guess, to close on, I've worked in public policy at senior levels for Senator Feinstein, and the last 10 years as an investment banker working a lot of social impact and regional projects. So I have an outsider's lens, and I hope having maybe that new creative thinking coupled with all of the support and the moment will be able to really achieve some things that are special. So I appreciate that opportunity, Laura. I would tell you again, thank you so much for participating in this keynote. It was a wonderful discussion. I hope that those that are listening can follow up on PTech, reach out to you, reach out to your team, because these are things in our communities for our CCDs in particular that are really making a difference for those students. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning.
Laura, Ahmad, thank you so much for that engaging discussion. Just honing in on exactly the ways that business and education can work together to expand access to 21st century jobs nationally and innovation economy careers here in Silicon Valley is the perfect way to almost end a forum like this.
Absolutely, that's right. David is saying almost because we want to keep these conversations going. You'll see in the programs that you received in your email, as well as here in the chat box, links to some networking rooms based on each of the panels we've had here today. Every single one of them is represented. And so it's your turn. We want to hear from you. Help us break down silos between business, education, nonprofits, elected leaders. All voices are welcome. So go ahead and join whichever rooms are appealing to you. Moderators and in many cases, panelists as well from today's morning sessions will be there to facilitate the conversation.
On behalf of the Leadership Group Board, our staff, my colleagues on the education team, and the generous sponsors that made this day possible, thank you for joining Education Summit 2020. We'll see you in the networking rooms.